And welcome back to Open Your Eyes. We're now starting with our first conversation in the morning. Actually, political history trend. This is actually part two of that. The first one, of course, we had Miss Carolyn Sandiford in with us to talk to us about it, and it was an excellent conversation. It gave us an insight into the history and what the trends are. So I'll tell you what, we decided why not bring forth phase two of that, or part two of that. So Miss Carolyn is in with us. Good morning.
Good morning, John. Good morning, Marlene.
And how are you today?
It's a beautiful day. I can only think all things are beautiful, and I can only hope for the best for today.
Well,
we must always be optimistic, be thankful that we are alive, and that I am on Channel 5. Open your eyes. Yes.
And sharing all the work that I know you would do whether or not people asked you to do.
Yes, I am just fascinated, in terms of the whole election cycle processes. But I think this year in particularly, when I think, Marlene, you nailed it on the head last time to say that the unpredictability, the uncertainty, this is really, 2020 is just a year of you don't know what to expect anymore.
Yeah,
that is so true.
So I'll tell you what, I'd like to start this way. Nomination day has come and gone. And
Yes.
I think we did mention that for nomination day, we saw, I think, 91 candidates rearing their heads to try and vie for these positions, right?
That's right.
And it turned out that about 88 of them were eligible. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's what we've read.
Yeah.
So can you tell us what makes one eligible? And I think this is very important for folks to understand. What makes a candidate eligible to vie for those positions?
The reality is that the criteria is very simple. You're a Belizean, you're 18 years of age, and you would have lived in Belize for a certain time. What transpired, and of course you have to have 6 registered voters of the constituency that you're vying for or wish to vie for nominate you. Mm-hmm. And I think what happened last week, what we saw is that while persons, the majority or most would have been eligible, so to speak, there was one nominee whose nomination was rejected on the basis of dual citizenship. And then there were other nominees who were, let me say, potential nominees, mm-hmm. who had indicated that they would have run, but due to some reason or the other, they didn't carry through. In other words, you had, like, for example, people who would have put their letter to the election and boundaries and said, this is my intent to run, or their political party would have put up their name and said, this person is running. And basically, they didn't run for many reasons. Maybe they took cold feet. Maybe in some instances, my source is telling me that they didn't get the 6 persons registered voters to nominate them. So for one reason or the other, they did not find themselves on the ballot. And now we have 88 nominees who are now going to be on the ballot, 31 for the People's United Party, 31 for United Democratic Party. And of course, we have those for the BPP, and we have independents. And at the end of the day, so it works out to about 35.2% for each of the major parties, and the remaining for the third parties and independents.
Yeah.
So there's no specific qualifications, Marlene and John. There's always the debate on a voter, a person who is running for office ought to have certain minimum qualifications as if you're applying for a job, mm-hmm. because in reality, it is a job that you're applying for. But it's democracy. And to be fair, democracy, you elect the person who you believe is going to represent you. And that person doesn't necessarily have to have the qualifications that you or me may think, but rather what the people believe that they should have. And that's what democracy is all about.
Yeah. We would be the ones that would have to demand that they have some sort of qualifications when you meet with them, when you talk with them, or listen to what they're presenting.
But remember, Marlene and John always go back to the point where they say, you elect the government you deserve,
Yep.
or you elect the person that best represents you. So your representation is a representation of you, or not necessarily you, but the majority of people that live in your particular constituency.
You're taking me down a diversion, because I really want to get into whether or not we're actually choosing people who we feel represent us best, or if we're still stuck in this political divide, or feeding into some of the campaigns that we see. There's always a lot of character attacks that take place. We don't talk about qualifications or very much. Sometimes we talk about past accomplishments, but a lot of time it's character attacks.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much that influence voters either.
Well, the reality is we have learned as well that a person being qualified within the qualifications that an individual may set does not necessarily mean that the person can perform. And so and this is why it's a great debate. And this is why also that we look at it from a standpoint of leveling the field, and also to be fair, because one cannot, in a democratic process where election should be fair and just and participatory, one cannot say, well, you must be qualified with a master's degree or 10 years of experience or so on and so forth. The reality is you're just representing people. Now that of course encompasses a lot, but it is representing people.
Let's go back to the number of candidates that are going to be in this election. And one of the things I found interesting is looking at the fact that this election, the majority of constituencies will have more than 2 candidates.
Absolutely. Actually, 61.3% are going to have more than 2 candidates, or have 3 candidates, which are 19 of the constituencies. And this is why I continue to point out that when you have more than 2 candidates and you have the third parties and the independents, this can become an issue or a factor when we look at those constituencies which are battleground constituencies. Because when the swing that has to happen or the spread is so narrow, and then there is a penetration of the independent or the third party, it does have an impact in terms of what that what the elected person, who that elected person is going to be. I think it's also great for democracy, because you have a greater choice, you have a wider choice. Now, whether those third parties are able to elevate themselves and distinguish themselves and put themselves in the conversation to ensure that their voice is heard, that their issues that they wish to bring about is heard, whether they have the resources to have the machinery in place, because we all know that election is won on election day, to quote the Right Honorable George Rice. And once you are out there election day, it's your machinery that's going to either make or break you. And putting together a well-oiled machinery require resources. And so those are some of the issues the third parties and independent candidates will have to deal with. Then you may have persons, those when the fatigue or the hatred, people say we don't vote in people, we vote out people. Whether that would be so much to the extent that I don't care who I vote, I just want to get you out, then those are some of the other issues that come into play.
Now, does this represent, we spoke of the 61% having 3 candidates, but there are also some that have 4 and some that have 5.
Yes. There are 2. There are 2 that have 4 candidates. This is Belize Rural Central and Coruscant Southeast. And again, if you go back to Belize Rural Central, where you had a spread of about 1.1%, and Coruscant Southeast that had a spread of about 3%, you can then see where the independent and the third party candidate can penetrate, that percentage that they need to swing their constituency in their favor. And then you have one that has 5, which is Stan Creek West. And again, you're talking about a constituency that had a spread of less than 1%, only 0.12%. So that in itself again becomes, a major issue in terms of of voting, voting and the spread that you have for your choices that you have within those constituencies.
So in reality, how many constituencies will only have the two mass parties represented?
That will be, let me see, that would be, let me see, 31. Just let me take a look at that.
Yeah.
That would be 29.9%, which is 9.
Okay. So only
so
9?
Just nine constituencies are going to have 2 persons.
Okay. Wow. Is there a growth in terms of the number of constituencies that have more than 2 representatives putting themselves up for election?
No, because we had a higher percentage of the third party. In fact, BPP was well represented in the last election, but this year there was a reduction in their percentage, and then of course you now have the BPF, who has increased their percentage in terms of candidates.
Okay. Right. But one of the things I really appreciated is the democratic process, and but when third parties or independents rear their heads in various constituencies, I think it's a very loud message to both parties, to the major parties. What can you say about that? And I'd like for us to shed light there, because people must understand when you see somebody else beside those 2 parties running there, it simply means, hey, that either I tired of you, or I need to throw my hat out there because I want to become a leader.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very interesting question, John. I think one of the things one can look at, you can look at it from 2 standpoints. One standpoint, you can look at it from what is the base of the political parties over time. Okay? Now, when you look at the base, be mindful that you're not looking at what comes out to vote, but in terms of let me rephrase that, you're not looking at a percentage of the total people that came out to vote, rather you're looking at a percentage of the total registered voters. Okay? So if you look at that figure and you start moving from, let us say, from 1998 to 2015, what you would have seen is an average base of the People's United Party at 39.2% and an average base for the UDP at 37.4%. So that leaves you with at least 24.4% of the population who is basically saying we are neither PUP or UDP. One of the things that is extremely interesting is that if you look at the highs of the base of the PUP, you're going to see, of course, that was in 1998, where it brought out 53.4% of the total registered voters voted for PUP. And then, of course, that was a low for the UDP, which was at 35.2%. But in 2008, what you also saw was the PUP base really plummeted to 31.6%. And the UDP base rose, of course, to 43.5%. But on an average, if I look at it just on an average over the 6 elections, you're going to look at a 37.4 for the UDP and a 39.2 for the PUP. What that is really saying to you that it's over time, there's not this distinguishing factor. Now, what you're seeing on the screen is a bit different. What you're seeing on the screen is the percentage of the population that went out to vote. So we looked at the percentage of what was PUP and what was UDP that went out to vote. Okay? Which is different
from those who identify.
Percentage of the total registered voters. In other words, when you start thinking of the base of a party, you're looking at that percentage which says no matter what, no matter what, we are going to come out and vote. Yes?
Yes, man. The word we use is diehards, right?
Say to you that the average.
All right.
The average for the PUP is 39.2 and the average for the UDP is 37.4. But that graph that you were looking at just a while ago was looking at the percentage of what came out to vote of the total that voted. And what that was showing you that remember we had this conversation, Marlene and John, where we said that the popular vote does not necessarily translate into a party winning. You recall that?
Yes.
Yes.
Do we still have you there?
there?
Yes?
Yes.
Are you hearing us?
Hello?
Are you hearing us?
You hearing us?
Yes, I'm
Yes,
picking
yes.
you up back.
Okay.
Yes, I'm hearing you now. Good. Yes, I was saying that if you recall, we spoke about the fact that the popular vote does not necessarily mean that you will win to form the government.
Yes.
Yes.
Right? That
Yes,
was
yes.
what we discussed. So what that graph was showing was that in 1993, if you recall, we said that PUP won the popular vote of the people that went out to vote. So they had 51.2% and the UDP had 48.7%. But it was the UDP that formed the government because they had the most number of seats, or the majority of seats.
Yes.
That happened in what we would call a 1 in 6 outings, meaning of the 6 outings that we went into general election, there was one, if we would call it an anomaly or the exception, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But thereafter, everybody who won the popular vote won the election. But what this graph is also showing you, if you take a look at it, is that when PUP was at its highest, which was in 1998, 59.3% of the population supported PUP and 39.2% supported the UDP. When PUP was at its lowest, 40.9% of the population supported the PUP and 56.3% supported the UDP. What that is also saying to you that even at its lowest point, PUP lowest is still higher than the UDP.
UDP is lowest, yes.
Yeah.
And even at its highest point, PUP's highest point is still higher than the highest point the UDP has reached.
Interesting.
Very, very interesting there.
And then you start seeing where they narrowed that gap come 2012 and 2015.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if you look at the bottom where you see the third parties or the other, you are then going to see where the third parties penetration at time, if this sort of trend would continue, can be very, very significant in terms of swinging constituencies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always appreciate the visuals because I think we can very clearly see how that gap has reduced significantly.
Yes.
Between both political parties. And I mean, when you look at the major swings and how they take place prior and with a growing third party presence, I think what you're saying, we can very much see right here on the graph.
On the graph as well, I think at about, if I'm not mistaken, 2012, there is a 1.6 for the third party. And
That's right.
there is a 48.0 for PUP, and there's a 50.4 for the UDP. Now, if we speed up to 2015, there is a 2.7% growth for the third party, which took away from the PUP a 4.73, but the UDP remained at about 5.00.
Well, you can't say where we take it away from either.
Well, that's true. But at the same time, we could see the numbers.
The reality, right. The reality is that the UDP reduced by 0.4.
0.4, yes.
And the PUP reduced by 0.7. You see? And that is where you see the third party, other swing move from 1.6 to 2.7. But again, remember, that's a combination of the third party.
Yes.
Be mindful now that if you go back to 1993, be mindful that the UDP won on a coalition as well. So we always have to keep that in mind.
Okay.
But the point I'm making in all this, if we start looking at this, and remember, it's nationally now.
Yeah.
You're talking about more the popular vote and nationally.
Yeah.
But you can do this, and what we will do in another session, Marlene, and leading up to that day, we can look at constituency by constituency, and you will be able to look at what is the base for the PUP, what is the base for the UDP, what is expected of the UDP to come out for election day, what is expected of the PUP, and what would be some of the factors that are going to affect voter turnout, that enthusiasm, you know, and
I'm glad you said that word.
It's going to be many issues.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that
many
word.
Issues.
Because the last time we had you last week, and we started to touch on some of this information, and your final slide was talking about the enthusiasm gap, and we didn't have a chance to get into it. I'd love to use that as a segue to go to the previous slide before we talk about voting trends, to talk about you had the referendum trend there, but I also think that it's important for us to talk about turnouts and expectations that we tend to have. So let's talk about the enthusiasm gap and what that means for us moving into this election, and also the history of voter turnout.
Absolutely. And if you can look at the slide again,
you have it in
take a look at the 1993 elections, you saw 72.1 voter turnout. And in 1998, it became a 90%. So you're talking about 18% jump. But then remember, 1998 was re-registration. Now, if one would look at that trend, because we recently had re-registration, one would want to think, if we look at the last election, which is 73%, which was 2015, one would want to think that that would jump in this election because of re-registration. And that is where, again, we spoke about all these uncertainties and unpredictability. That would have been what one would have anticipated to happen.
And we do have to say, of course, that 65 represents the voter turnout for the referendum, the ICJ referendum.
Exactly. So that points to what the enthusiasm was for the ICJ at that point in time. But ICJ and general elections are two different things.
Absolutely.
Let's be clear. There were some people who voted party lines, and then there were some people who voted their conscience.
So that's one of the things, and
absolutely,
you started the conversation saying all the unpredictable factors about this upcoming election, because there's certain expectations. I know people like yourself who pay attention to the numbers and the trends would expect after a re-registration.
Yes,
this is one.
Exactly.
You'd expect a higher voter turnout because, you know, people who've passed away are no longer on the list.
The list has been cleaned up, so to speak.
So it should be that it's a better representation of the voters that are here. But now we don't know if it's actually going to be an increase. And
that is going to, and again, go back to the point where I always say, politics is the art of the impossible. You can never tell what can happen. However, yes, while we would have expected a higher voter turnout, there are some factors that we have to take into consideration. And those factors are, some of them would be national issues, and some factors are going to be local issues. And they often said all politics is local. If you look, for example, one of the key issues, of course, for us has to be with the parallel crisis that we have. We have an economic crisis and we have a health crisis. And so the electorate, to my mind, is going to be looking at who can lead us out of this crisis, and whether their arguments are convincing enough, or whether I trust them enough to come out and vote for them. So trust and leadership is going to be a very key in terms of the enthusiasm gap. Am I having the same old, or am I seeing something that distinguishes one from the other? But with all that, we also have the issue of COVID-19, and of course, as we all know, it is surging at this point in time. And it is also surging in specific areas.
That's right.
Which is the north. So when we look at, let us say, an Orange Walk district that has 4 constituencies, and Coruscant that has 4 constituencies, and you look at some of the villages where we are having the increases, not only in terms of cases, but also in terms of death, how is that going to impact on the population feeling safe and secure to come out, or wanting to come out no matter what?
Yeah. And I know
and a lot of that is going to deal with what is it that is going to compel them and enthuse them to come out.
Yeah.
And I know you can dive into voter trends even within the districts. So what is usually the representation from the north when we have an election, a general election?
And normally the north is one of those areas where voter turnout is very high in comparison to the rest of the country. The north is very high. But if you want to start drilling down into some of the constituencies, what you're also going to find out, and if we can take a look at that little slide that I have there, you're going to see some of the battleground constituencies at this point in time. And remember, this is a starting point based on 2015.
Okay.
Yes.
There's a lot that is going to play into these constituencies. For example, who registered more people post re-registration, who that keep saying the better ground machinery, and that sort of thing. So those are some of the things. What are the local issues for the particular constituencies? But if you look at the battleground constituencies, you're going to see quite a number coming out of Coruscant. You have Coruscant Southwest. You have Coruscant Bay. You have Orange Walk South. So you have Coruscant Southeast. And when you look at, let us say, Orange Walk South, that was a 1.1%. When you look at Coruscant Bay, it was 2.9%. When you look at Coruscant Southeast, it's 3.0%. And when you look at Coruscant Southwest, it's 4.3%. So you're seeing constituencies that won with a spread of less than 4%, less than 5%. Now, again, let me be mindful, and I always reiterate, this was 2015 figures. But if we go by these, you're seeing then where, if you're a political party and you are strategizing, you try to strategize for the constituencies that can be swung easily.
Yeah. And it
so
goes back.
If I need 2%, if there's a 2% spread, I need to swing that back to me. What do I need to do?
Yeah. And it's easier to reroute the course of a 1.1% shift rather than moving something that's at 34%.
Exactly. Exactly, Marlene.
And we're saying
it's tougher. It's not. Let me say, it's not impossible, because remember, nothing is impossible in politics. And
it's probably a more practical challenge. Let's say it that way. Yeah.
There's a lot of dynamics because, for example, if you look at the constituencies that had the greatest of spreads, Queen Square, Mesopotamia, in both cases, yes, their spreads were very high, but there has been a change in terms of the individuals who are running.
Yeah. And I was also going to say that it's not, it's not that we don't see candidates in these areas still working hard for their vote on either side.
Exactly.
Because everybody wants to be that great story at the end of the day who pulled off the impossible feat.
Exactly. And it has been done before. It has been done before. So let's not discount it.
Yeah. So I want to be clear about that so people don't feel that there's some kind of assumption made as to what the results would be. Anything is possible.
Absolutely not.
The other,
like we kept saying last time, Marlene and John, that you're at zero
at this point. Yes.
Election day. All of what we're seeing here gets thrown out the window.
Yeah.
Then
because come election day, it's 0-0. What the numbers do show you that over time the trend is such that what are the constituencies that become more difficult, and that's why we say medium to high probability.
Yes.
Meaning all things are possible because you're starting at 0-0, but the probability of these constituencies winning again is very high. It's not impossible. And then you have those who are between that 5 to 9. And then you have those, of course, which are less than
Sub 5, yeah.
And then you have those ones which we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which are less than 2%.
Yep. There's a 0.12% here, so that's a very
request where there are 5 candidates.
Exactly.
That are in that particular constituency.
And so you can see where a independent candidate or a third party candidate can do some damage in some of these constituencies. But then who they are going to damage, then you have to delve into the constituency. Are they someone who was once a PUP or a UDP, or have they traditionally been a third party? That kind of thing then starts to factor in, because then you're going to know who they're going to draw
now let's
voters from.
Let's throw this wrench into it now, as it has done to us this year so far. Some of these battleground areas, it's less than 100 votes is a difference. And some of the active COVID cases that we're seeing at this time, 200 in some areas, or over 200, means that, according to what the Prime Minister is saying, they won't be allowed to vote. So those are, now let me be clear too and say that we don't know the full demographics of that 200. Are there registered voters? I don't know. We don't have that information. But 200 people who would have registered to vote would not be able to participate. And that can have an impact as well. Wouldn't you imagine?
Exactly. Absolutely. And this is why I go back to say that when we look at the previous slide where we show the national trend, and then bring it down to at the constituency level, because remember, it's the majority of constituencies of a party. Once a party gets the majority, regardless of what that win is, whether it's by 1 or 5 or 2,000, at the end of the day, it's the party with the majority of seats that win. And so if you are then working in these constituencies where COVID-19 is, of course, surging and very high, what you have to start looking and checking your list now and to see, well, if I needed, say, 1,500 to win, and out of that I have 50, 75 people who are COVID-19 positive, how do I replace them? I should have by now categorized my list as to who is with me, who is leaning towards me, who is leaning towards the other side, and who is solid in the other side, and start to know who I need to go pick off, if I can use that word. I have to start pick off voters if this is going to impact me. And this is where I go back to the point of saying a well-oiled machinery. Because at 1 week before an election, you ought to have that machinery already in place, know who their solid voters, know who their voters were and get trouble. Know
which ones are scared of voting.
Exactly. You would have done all your due diligence and I call it the emotional intelligence.
Because
and
maybe
your machinery is important, because your machinery would have been gathering that, and now you are going. You're at this point. You're either, I just have to hold on to this, make sure they don't get COVID-19. Or make sure I attend to certain things, or I need X amount and I need to go pick off a certain amount of voters. Where am I going to find them? And start looking for them.
And when you think about it, a lot of us know people in constituencies like that. Ms. Mary may have been one diehard for a political party all her life, but now she's 80 and doesn't want to risk going to a polling station.
Exactly.
So that's the last year. But one of the things I'm thinking about here, Carolyn, and I'd really like to know a trend, if there is a trend. I feel that political parties are actually singing to a choir. And then when they're trying to make a pitch for the people from the other side, it's actually telling those people what had happened years ago with this one and what had happened years ago with that one, rather than to see how I could, or how you and I will be working together to make our lives better. And I say our because I am tired of hearing the you or I want to do this for you, when in reality you're actually, I'm trying to give you the ability to lead me the proper way. Is there a trend for that in terms of how political parties make a pitch? This day and age is totally different, right? There is social media, there is this, there is that, but there is always the remember this situation.
I think one of the key issues in terms of being strategic, one has to have an appreciation of what resonates with people.
Yeah.
There are some people who are not necessarily interested in the issue per se, as much as they are more interested in getting you out. And so oftentimes you find, and I use the word often, times you find the saying that says, and I had said it before, you vote out parties rather than vote in parties.
Yeah.
And that it doesn't mean that there's not a segment of the population who more and more, and I think we're beginning to see that more and more people are demanding more. One of the key inspirations I've had is when I listen to young people. I think you may have had them on one
Yes.
time,
Yeah.
on Youth Voices. And so when they're now starting to challenge that pattern,
The status
and that
quo,
is
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And I think the more we start doing that, the more, John, you're going to start finding the issues. But the reality is that politics, historically and globally, has shown, and I think the great United States of America, hailed as one of the greatest democracies of all time, shows you that regardless of the rise of the independent voter,
Yeah.
there are still solid amount of people that are going to come out for vote.
Yeah.
We know, in terms of looking at that slide that I said, the trends, we know at the end of the day, at a minimum, 39.2% of the people who come out to vote are going to vote for UDP. We know at a minimum, 40.9% of the people are going to vote for the PUP. That leaves you with about 20%.
Yeah.
And that is the independent vote. And I think that is the voting that may be more looking at the issue element, John.
And that's interesting, and I like what John was the direction we're going with that, because I'm not sure that I see, and I'll be very fair in saying that I will only see the ads that are on television and some that are targeted online. But I'm not sure I see so much of a change in the type of campaigning that's taking place versus the type of conversations that I'm hearing this time around. Like you, I love the conversations with people. We had a first-time voter panel who said to us clearly, one, they're not on the platform we use. They're on Facebook. We use Instagram.
Yes.
Secondly, they are not bringing us substance. They were very articulate young people who were so clear. They were talking about equal opportunity bills and wanting perspectives on that. They were talking about technology and agriculture. And I understand that this is one group of young people. There are the masses as well.
Yeah.
But my question is, it seems that the campaigns itself, while we recognize that there are more young people who are graduating from tertiary level institution, UB had the graduation. They said this is the biggest cohort was the bachelor's level.
Yeah.
So they're going out, they're studying outside of Belize, within Belize, they're watching US politics play out and expectations and disappointments that people have with that. And it seems that it's kind of settling into us as well. But the campaigns don't seem to match that up. Do you share the same sentiment, or is this simply my observation?
I share your sentiment.
Yeah.
Yes and no. Yes, in that the campaigns to some extent seeks to get people on board with their platform, and they have been doing certain things over time that have worked, and they will continue to do that.
Yeah.
Campaigning, again, we said this earlier, is local. Yeah. So a lot has to do with the one-on-one and the face-to-face and the conversations and so on and so forth. So despite the platforms that we now have, there is still that element that will continue because people do like the one-on-one.
Yeah,
that's true.
The media platforms and so is shifting the medium through which we are delivering the message. Yeah. And even if you look at some of the COVID-19 has put us into this virtual space.
Sure.
So even the way we are presenting manifestos and policies and so on and so forth, all of that is changing.
Yeah.
And even the audience that is looking at that is changing as well.
Yeah.
So there are certain things to my mind that is not changing, but I think there are certain things which I am seeing the incremental change.
Yeah.
And I think the incremental change you're beginning to hear more from, I keep saying, the next generation.
Yeah.
If you think about it, John and Marlene, those voters between who would have in, let us say, 2008, would have been anywhere between 7, 8 years and upward. All they have ever known is one political party.
Yeah.
So they have only seen what that party is doing. So you're talking about anywhere from 18 to, let us say, 30 years old.
Yeah.
They have only seen that political party.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the way they communicate will be based on what they know.
Yeah.
So the other side, that political party wants to use the opportunity to say, as you did say earlier, well, let us go back to what had happened previously.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I didn't experience that. This is what I'm experiencing now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you start looking at the age cohorts,
Yeah.
what you may then start to seeing is some changing in what the expectations are of those voters vis-a-vis as the voter graduates into another cohort.
Yeah.
As a young person growing up, I can say to you, I remember challenging certain things in politics and in Belize. And if I spoke to my father just looks at me and says, Mr. Price told me so. And the conversation done right there. But and then you would be you move on, you have your issues, but you move on. I would not have had other platforms to share what are my issues, but now this generation have multiple platforms.
Yeah.
And you're beginning to see that more and more. So I think over time you're going to see not only the change in the medium, but also the change in the message. But it will still boil down, in my opinion, to what is local, because I might not like the party, but I like you.
Okay.
I have a great relationship with you, and that kind of thing. So there are multiple issues, and in this election, there's going to be multiple issues.
And even more so, I think we haven't yet touched, but maybe we'll get into it. If not before the election, on election day, what's the impact of two brand new leaders being at the helm? And are people looking more at the leadership more so than party right now? Because that's also, I think, a fair question. But let's not lose the opportunity as we round it off, because the producer's here already.
Yes, absolutely.
We got that last slide. It is also the issue of whether it's because of COVID, whether it's whatever reason. It could also be because we're just tired of the options, don't like the campaign, don't feel the election because there's no mass party and rally and whatnot happening, or dollar beer.
Yes, exactly. Again, different strokes and different folks.
Agreed. I agree completely. So, I mean, the energy of elections can be really energizing for many.
Right.
So we got to talk about that enthusiasm gap as we close. People coming out to vote is what's going to make the difference. Yeah.
And the numbers, no matter how we put it, at the end of the day, the numbers are not going to lie.
Yeah.
We have seen, as I've said, at its lowest point ever, 31.6% of the total electorate register comes out for the PUP. And at its lowest point ever, 35.2% came out for the UDP.
Yeah.
When we look again, to reiterate what actually comes out, we have seen where at a minimum 39.2% comes out for the UDP and 40.9% comes out for the PUP.
Yeah.
So what we have to look at is that 19.9%, whether that, which is about 20%, whether that 20% are going to be so enthused as to want to come out, because it's them who are going to swing that election. Because if you look at the 40.9 and the 39.2, you're not off by much. You're really just off by a 0.3. So to speak. I mean, it would be 1 point something. So you're not really off by much. So it's that 20% that really is going to
make the decision.
To make the difference. And it's that enthusiasm gap is going to be very, very important there. And at this point in time, at the local level, you ought to know who that percentage are. And remember, this is an average.
Yeah.
So in some constituencies, it will be higher, and in some constituencies, it will be lower.
Yeah.
But on an average, you're talking about 20% of the population that needs to be enthused. And whether it will be the policy, the economic recovery, the health policies, what are these key policies that are going to resonate? Is it a job that I'm looking at? Is it I'm totally pissed off with the corruption that is taking place, and I am enthused by what your policy is saying? I am totally not feeling the COVID relief. What is your policy saying about economic recovery immediately and for long term? I am a member of the tourism industry. What is it you're saying that is going to help me if I'm a tour guide or a hotelier or I'm a taxi driver? You know, if I'm in agriculture, what's going to help me? So these are some of the things that within each area that is going to resonate on a local level.
And how do you put into perspective Caribbean countries like Jamaica or Trinidad, where we saw low voter turnout? Using the Jamaican example, and to be clear, they always have a low, what we would consider a low voter turnout, but they had the lowest that they've seen since, I think it may have been the 80s. And I mean, how do you use these as measuring sticks to see what the potential impact of COVID-19 may be? Do you?
Absolutely. And I think COVID-19 did play a role in some of the elections. But let us look also at issues of what I call disenchantment and cynicism. If you were following, for example, the Jamaica election, what you would have seen was high energy within one camp and very low energy in another camp. What you would have seen, the internal politics of one particular party was very damaging to that party. At the end of the day, the leader, go back again to the trust in the leadership. Be mindful that in that part, in these particular elections that we're seeing, both Trinidad and in Jamaica, there were one term. In Jamaica, it was a one term.
And it was an early election.
It was a one term. Right. So you're still only seeing them one term, so we trust them to continue. Belize is a different scenario. Remember also, like, for example, and I can use the example of Jamaica and St. Kitts, you're talking about the same leader. So it was Andrew Holmes who was in the government, and it was his party that won again. He was leading the party again. In Belize, it's a different scenario. We're dealing with re-registration, COVID just like them, but we're looking at a change of leadership. And you're looking at two individuals, and you quite rightly said, who will I trust to lead us? Who have the acumen, the skill set? Who is presenting the kind of policies that resonates with me?
You've given us
and is it a matter of fatigue?
Carolyn,
I am just tired of this set and I need them to go.
Carolyn, you give us so much food for thought just in terms of what to look for in the data. It's going to be a really interesting elections, and I know we're going to have more to talk about before that date as well. Thank you.
Absolutely. And it will become more interesting when you go at the constituency level, Marlene.
And that's what we're going to do next Wednesday. So I will be looking out for that. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it because it puts it all into perspective way ahead of time. And don't worry, we don't have to fight to get this information in during election day. All right, do take care, and thank you once again.
We really appreciate you. We'll see you again on Wednesday next week.
You're welcome anytime.
All right.
So there we go.
Absolutely. We will be there. It's a date.
It is. So there we go. Conversation, political history and trends. Very interesting. We'll do it again on Wednesday of next week. But we need to take a break. When we come back, we'll be chit-chatting with representatives of Galen University as they'll be making that pitch for you to join with them. And they've got 2 new courses going on. They'll tell you about that when we come back. Stay with us.